You don't feel ashamed of yourself per se unless you have someone else looking at you to make you feel ashamed, right?
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and we're going to continue our conversation about fun facts leading up to the 250th anniversary of the United States. Then later on the pod, we sat down with Lucas Wilson during Pride Month to talk about his research and the dangers of conversion therapy. It's a great pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I am afraid I have overexposed myself.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So last week, we were traveling in a hotel all week at a convention.
Yes, we were.
As you do. And as, many people understand, when you travel to events like this where you're seeing friends and seeing people constantly all day long and having a great time, but by the end of it, you're just absolutely exhausted, right?
Yeah.
So we'd gotten to the end of this big meeting, and it's the last evening. It's kind of the evening you just go sit at the hotel restaurant bar and just, chat with friends, and, everybody's getting ready to part ways tomorrow.
Yeah, good time.
Right. So I'm down there at the bar, and, folks are at a table and folks are kind of in and out and gathering.
Right.
And I just decided, you know what? I need to be out of my work clothes. I've got to go change into my
well-deserved change of clothes.
Uniform, right?
Yes.
Which consists of some sort of jeans, whether that's shorts or, long pants, and a white t-shirt.
That is your uniform.
That has been my uniform since I was 2 years old.
Right.
Okay. So I think I can pop up. Nobody will notice if I'm gone for a few minutes, right? So I pop upstairs and I'm very quickly going to make a costume change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as I am changing clothes, I pull my white, which is essentially a white Hanes undershirt.
Fancy.
Fancy.
You're fancy that way.
Out of a suitcase. And I thought, this is really wrinkled, even for a white t-shirt. I've got to run an iron over it real quick, right?
As one does.
So got my jeans on. Don't have my top on yet.
Okay.
And
where was I?
Nowhere to be found, thankfully. And so I turned the iron on and I'm ironing, but the way the ironing board is positioned, it's facing the window, but farther back in the room.
Yeah.
So I'm facing the window, and we're in a hotel that's along the water, which was beautiful, right?
Oh, it was gorgeous, yeah.
So as I'm starting to iron my shirt, something catches my eye in the water.
Okay.
And all of a sudden I realize what it is. It is a bunch of dolphins playing in the water.
Oh, okay. So this is cool. I
was
thought you were going in
so
another
cool.
direction, but I like this direction better.
It was so cool. I've never seen this in person before. And so I was just mesmerized. I was like, I've got to see. So I go over right to the window and I'm just watching these dolphins jump around and play. It was the coolest thing ever.
Oh, they're so cool.
And about 60 seconds into it, I realized I'm standing right here in the hotel window with no shirt on.
No wonder the dolphins were jumping out of the water. So you were giving Flipper a show.
Apparently. Although I'm not sure I would be jumping and dancing around for a 50-year-old woman, without a shirt on. Anyways, so as I realized that, it was it made me laugh at myself. And then I thought, okay, we're on the 19th floor. Surely nobody, can see in this window. I mean, if somebody's across the water with a, telescope, you know what? More power to you.
Sure.
Sorry for this show that you get. It's not great. Anyway, so I quickly finished ironing my shirt and put it back on. But I had to laugh at myself.
Oh my gosh, those lucky dolphins.
Hey,
Well,
Anyways,
that is a great story.
So I tell that to say, if photos emerge on the internet, if anyone sees anything such as that, it was completely an innocent mistake.
Yeah, if you're in
Not
Florida
intended.
and you see a distraught dolphin swimming in circles.
He's been traumatized.
He's been traumatized.
Anyways.
Well, Missy, next week we are leading up to the country's 250th anniversary, and you've been doing this ongoing segment for a couple of weeks. It's been a lot of fun. You've been kind of sharing some fun facts about our country, stumping me along the way.
Yeah.
And if I see the papers in your hand, you may have some more fun facts for us.
I do. We've been kind of going over some history of our country and kind of deciding, some points where we went right, some parts where we maybe didn't get things right, and just kind of looking over to see what we can learn and what we can be proud of along the way.
Sure.
So we're going to continue that series probably for, I don't know, a week or two more. I'm really enjoying it. I don't know if the listeners are, so we'll keep doing it as long as I'm enjoying it
All right, well,
because
drop some knowledge.
that's right. So today's little moments in history, there were so many. It took me forever to compile this because there was a lot of information of things that happened on this week in history.
Yeah.
We kind of went with this week theme because we are Good Faith Weekly.
Sure.
So I had a hard time deciding, but these moments in history come largely from basically many of our listeners' lifetime.
Okay, all right.
Only
I may get one of these right then.
only one thing that was not in your lifetime.
Okay.
But yeah, many of our listeners will remember, a lot of these years. So, okay, the first thing I found that is kind of heavy, and we're going to start out on a low note. 1964, on this week, the three freedom riders and civil rights activists, Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney, were murdered by the KKK mob near Meridian, Mississippi.
Yep.
They were, of course, working to register Black voters. And as I sat and kind of read the totality of the story, again, of course, we knew of the events, but just immersing myself in the story and getting very angry, obviously, about it. In particular, just the lack of consequences for many of the men involved in this crime. And then it just led into kind of a spiral of me thinking about the Voting Rights Act that was passed just a year after that murder occurred. And then just a few months ago, the Voting Rights...
Supreme Court just dismantles
stripped it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That one kind of had me in a funk and just, I don't know what to do with it. But it's a dark moment, and you would like to think that there was an upward trajectory from there, but clearly... we still have work to do.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it was one of the most pivotal moments in the civil rights history, along with Selma and what happened in Birmingham and just all the things associated with those summers. And they were doing great things down there, registering voters. And then this happens, and I can remember watching the movie Mississippi Burning. I was so inspired by the movie. A lot of fictional things, were taken into account there, but it inspired me to read the book. And so it was the history of what happened down there. And it was just a microcosm of the South and, what was trying to be achieved down there and the pushback against voting rights and civil rights at large. And if there was any good that came from it, you had Civil Rights Act, you had the Voters' Rights Act, and a lot of progress began to gain steam after those murders. But as you said, it did not mean the resistance to that change ever ceased.
Right.
And it is culminating even today.
And I think we're all learning a very hard lesson in complacency.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
And ignorance right now. Because if we start to take things for granted or think that a piece of legislation has fixed anything, we are sorely mistaken. And I'm embarrassed at, how difficult that lesson has been for me over my adult years.
Yeah.
So moving on, in 1972, this week, Title IX was passed through Congress.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, which essentially, for those who may not remember or may not know, it states that any school that receives any federal money from the elementary to university level must provide fair and equal treatment of the sexes in all areas, including athletics. So that was pretty cool little fact. Title IX, as a result, is credited with decreasing the dropout rate of girls from high school and increasing the number of women who pursue higher education and complete college degrees, which I think is pretty incredible.
It is really incredible. Now, what's fascinating to me about that is that it was passed in 1972. And it just, again, demonstrates, even though something is passed, the implementation of that legislation or policy takes decades to implement.
Right.
Because, I can still remember my high school days in the late 80s. There was not equality to be had. And,
No.
There's still a long way from equality in this country. And so even though that was a really cool thing in 72, we still got a long way to implement Title IX and equality.
Right. And if I remember correctly from what I read, again, I'm only able to get snippets on my notes, but if I remember correctly, it did not guarantee equal funding.
No, right. Yeah.
So there's the little asterisk.
There's the little
at
asterisk.
the end.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know there are huge discrepancies where that is concerned. But,
Mhm.
I'll take the win in
There
1972,
you go.
and
Yeah.
we'll keep working towards a better future. So this is in the completely random category, but I wanted to bring it up because it's interesting.
Mhm.
But in 1974, at a supermarket in Troy, Ohio, do you know what notable thing took place?
Troy, Ohio, 1974. No.
A pack of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit chewing gum became the first grocery item scanned with a universal product or UPC code.
Wow. I would have never gotten that one.
Isn't that so random?
So random.
So, of course, today there are billions of barcodes scanned daily. We don't even give it a second thought.
Right.
And, of course, now we've got QR codes and all the
Sure.
things. But I want to give credit where credit is due on this. The first version of a barcode was drafted by inventor Joe Woodland in the sand on Miami Beach in 1949.
Really?
Yes.
What was his name?
Joe Woodland.
I was so expecting Joe Barr, but go ahead.
That would have been amazing. There are so many details that I read about the development of this, but the one little fact I found most interesting is that he took his inspiration for the design from Morse code.
Ah, cool.
Yeah, which I thought that's pretty.
That
I'm
makes
so
sense.
glad there are smart people in the
I
world
know,
who can
right?
figure such things out. I would never have thought of that. But moving on to my lifetime now.
Oh, I see what you did there.
So in 1978, and this will feed so well into our interview today, but in 1978, the first Rainbow Pride flag premiered at the San Francisco Pride Parade
Awesome.
this week. Its creator, Gilbert Baker, remarked that it completely astounded me that people just got it in an instant, like a bolt of lightning, that this was their flag. He later said it belonged to all of us. And of course, now the flag is a ubiquitous symbol for queer pride and
Yeah,
liberation.
that's so cool.
So I love that little
Yeah.
nugget. So now we're going to move into the aughts.
All right.
Okay, so in 2005, this
Mhm.
again in the random category, but there's a larger point to be made. This is when, in this week, many Americans got a vocabulary lesson.
Mhm.
As we all learned, if we didn't know, what the meaning of the word glib was. Do you remember what I'm referencing?
No, I have no idea.
And right now, some of our listeners are like, yes, and some are, huh?
Yeah.
You don't know this. Okay. So this was when the infamous Matt Lauer and Tom Cruise interview took place on the Today Show.
Okay.
Do you not remember this?
No.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So Tom Cruise, they start arguing about mental health medications.
Okay, starting to kind of ring
Remember
a bell.
that? I think it
'cause-
stemmed from Brooke Shields had, become public with her battle with postpartum depression and her use of medication to help her through that. And so
and Tom being a Scientologist.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So they kind of had this back and forth, and this is when Tom basically told Matt Lauer, "You're so glib," or whatever. And so that kind of became a flashpoint moment. It was, of course, ripe for parody, which lots of
Right.
people, I'm sure SNL, did so, but it did bring mental health back to the forefront of the conversation, and
Yeah,
it was just
certainly
another
brought a lot
moment.
of awareness about mental health, and so as it was now that that you rang the bell here, as I remember it, I do remember that was kind of the first time mental health for me, at least, was put on the table to really think about seriously as something that we need to consider.
Right.
And so,
Right.
yeah.
It is an important conversation that needs to still be had today, and awareness is important.
Right.
So, Tom, how's that working out for you? Okay, anywho. I
What's
digress.
crazy about that, if you think about the totality of their two trajectories,
Oh, I know.
the Scientologists came out looking better after the
That's the
fact.
sad thing is as I find little things that
Right.
didn't age well
Yeah.
necessarily, but were still important in that moment. And I think this is one of those things. So
Absolutely.
moving on to the year 2015, a very important Supreme Court decision this week.
Can you give me a category?
In fact, on this day,
2015.
Supreme Court decision Obergefell v.
that's what I was going to say. I was going to
Hodges.
say
Were you
that.
going to say
Oh,
that?
yeah.
By one vote, the court rules that same-sex marriage cannot be banned in the United States. All same-sex marriages must be recognized nationwide, finally granting
That was
same-sex
such a
couples equal rights.
cool
It
moment.
was so cool to be, there. When I say there, collectively there
Right.
for and to watch the
I
celebrations
can remember
come down.
everybody coming out in DC and the celebrations
It was
happening.
really
And I remember
cool.
the White House lighting up in the rainbow colors. It was just so cool.
And since we're in the middle of Pride Month and our interview today has to do with that, I want to bring up a little vignette
Okay.
of something that is relatable.
Mhm.
So do you remember the first time we took our kids to Disney?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a big deal. It was kind of our first
Big
like
first time I'd ever been to
first time
Disney.
you had been, but this first time we were taking our kids. I was so
Yeah.
excited, booked the trip. And then someone said to me, that's gay days at Disney.
Scandalous.
I know. I was like, what are you talking about? So apparently there are
It's every day at Disney's gay
Right?
days.
So it was quote unquote unofficial gay days. And so that's what, then it became, then I was like, I don't know why somebody got me worried about it. I was like, oh my goodness, what are we about to encounter? I have very small children and
Yeah.
what are we going to see? Again, you guys, this was more than 20 years ago.
Right.
And so I didn't worry too much about it, but it was just in the back of my head that should I have planned it on a different time? Is this just going to be mass chaos or whatever?
Yeah.
Here's what I learned. And you and I commented on this because it was so funny.
It was so funny, but also just so revealing. I mean,
so
so
revealing. So if you've ever been to Disney World, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But at the end of the day, at closing time at any of the parks, but this particular night we were at Magic Kingdom, we were in the front, kind of the Main Street area, waiting to meet up with, my parents were with us or whatnot. And we were just watching people as they leave.
Yep.
And the typical Disney thing, you've got kids screaming.
Weeping and gnashing of teeth.
You've got
and
parents,
then there's the children.
Right. You've got parents frustrated, yelling at their kids.
Yeah.
Nobody has any patience left.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that the families that had same-sex couples
Yep.
were completely different.
They were singing songs, smiling, just
They were
having the
it was such a stark contrast to
Mhm.
your heteronormative, couples, families, whatever. It was and you and I just sat there and laughed about it. It was the funniest thing I think we had ever seen, but anyways,
Yeah.
I digress.
Yep.
So, but happy Pride, y'all.
Happy Pride.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So the day after the Supreme Court decision came down, Obergefell v. Hodges, Brittany or Bree Newsom
Mhm.
scaled the pole in South Carolina at the State House and removed the Confederate flag.
Oh, I remember that.
Remember
That was a
this?
big freaking deal. Yeah.
Yeah, she was arrested, of course, and her, within the hour, the flag was put back up. However, her actions reverberated across the nation and drew attention to the many Confederate symbols that are still across the South.
Mhm.
And, this action ultimately led to South Carolina permanently removing the flag from its capital.
Yep.
So I just can't help but think of our friend, Miguel de la Torre, as he talks with screwing with the system.
Yep,
And I thought
absolutely.
that's exactly what she did that day.
Exactly, yeah.
And good for her for putting her body on the line and
Right.
drawing attention to that.
Cool. That's so cool.
Okay, I have one more.
Okay.
In 2022.
2022. That's 4 years ago.
Yeah. This week, the Dobbs decision essentially overturned Roe v. Wade.
Man, you had
Right.
to end with that.
I know. I just realized that as I'm looking at my paper, but it's important, and I will tell you why it's important. Today's little history lesson comes pretty much exclusively from history.com.
Right.
Okay. This was not on there.
Really?
No.
That's interesting.
I just happened to know that this was the week.
Yeah.
And so I had to go look it up at a separate source.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's just because, again, it's pretty recent or if there's something else at play.
Yeah.
But I thought in light of that, it is very important to mention that. It, of course, has just horrible ramifications across the last few years for women's health. In fact, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine's president, Marcel Cedars, said this on the day the decision was released. She says, this decision removes an essential civil liberty that Americans have relied upon for nearly 50 years, one that is well grounded in the history and best traditions of our country.
Wow.
So, yeah. Do you remember that day?
I do
Do you remember
remember.
exactly what we did that day?
Yeah. I mean, the rumor was circulating a couple of days beforehand.
Well, it had been
that-
leaked, yeah.
that they were going to dismantle it, but then the decision was announced, and it was a gut punch. And I mean, And I'm still, I mean, we live in a state where women's rights and reproductive rights in particular are not valued at all. And it is deeply, deeply concerning.
Yeah, we when that decision came down, it was the middle of the workday, and there was a collection of about a half a dozen, maybe eight of our friends that collectively just said, you know what, we need to be together.
Hmm.
And we went down to kind of a local spot here in town known for, terrible drinks. But we all met up in this kind of local institution and we just sat
Yeah.
together and just, I don't know, it just, that was one moment in my lifetime where I thought the importance of community
Hmm.
is just so vital.
Hmm.
It's vital to this work, but it's also vital to grieving um, and moving forward.
Yeah.
And so,
I don't know if you meant this on purpose or this is just divine providence, but you bookend your list here today with a great reminder. One about the Voting Rights Act, and now with the Dobbs decision, that no matter what history has given us, no matter what advances we have made as a country and as a culture, the struggle and the fight should never stop. And you mentioned the word complacency a moment ago. And that, I think, is the great lesson as we approach 250 years of being a country. We more than ever must continue the fight, continue to rise up and demand democracy, demand representation, demand equal rights for every citizen. And that is the struggle today. That is the fight today. And as you have reminded us with your list, we can never take anything for granted, even when there's been legislation passed, even when there's been judicial precedent set by the Supreme Court. We must continue to fight and fight and fight because this democracy is never guaranteed.
yeah, I think you're exactly right. I didn't realize what my bookends were there,
Yeah.
but that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, speaking of continuing the fight, you and I sat down with Lucas Wilson this week. He has been fighting the dangers of conversion therapy. And we wanted to have Lucas on the show during Pride Month to celebrate Pride, but also to remind people that issues like conversion therapy, reparative therapy are still going on. And he wrote a book about it last year. A lot of his research is about the topic. And so we had a really robust conversation with him this week.
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing from him and learning. And again, just being reminded that nothing is ever guaranteed and we need to keep advocating.
Amen. So Missy and I'll be right back with Lucas Wilson. Good Faith Media is the new home of A Sermon for Every Sunday. This free resource offers lectionary-based video sermons by America's best preachers for use in worship, Bible study, small groups, Sunday school classes, or for individual use. All you do is push the button. With A Sermon for Every Sunday, you can be inspired by and learn from some amazing preachers: Otis Moss III, Amy Butler, Brian McLaren, Starlette Thomas, Will Willimon, Michael Curry, and many, many more. Hundreds and hundreds of free sermons are waiting just for you. You can find them at goodfaithmedia.org or asermonforeverysunday.com. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Dr. Lucas Wilson is a postdoctoral fellow in historical studies at the University of Toronto and former Justice, Equity, and Transformation Fellow at the University of Calgary. Wilson is a public-facing interdisciplinarian scholar of history, religion, gender, sexuality, and literature with a keen interest in creative nonfiction. He is the editor of Shame, Sex, Attraction, Survivor Stories of Conversion Therapy, and the author of At Home with the Holocaust, Postmemory, Domestic Space, and Second-Generation Holocaust Narratives. We invited Lucas to the pod this week to help us celebrate Pride Month, but also to educate us about his work. Lucas, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
So, Lucas, first, happy Pride.
You too.
Yeah, so I hope your month has been filled with joy and rainbows so far. I want to begin our conversation today learning a little bit more about your background. In particular, an important nugget that wasn't in the introduction a moment ago is that you are a graduate of Liberty University. And
Not to,
this,
Yes, I
Yes.
was.
So, I mean, one doesn't get from the commencement stage at Liberty to a gender and sexuality scholar in a straight line, pun intended.
Well
Yay
played.
for the dad joke,
Yeah,
right?
nicely
Okay.
done.
So, okay, I am nosy by nature. Give me the deets. Tell me how it happened.
Yeah. So I am what you call a homosexual. And
Excellent. Tell me more.
Hey, we've heard of those.
the legends that are anyway. Yeah. So I was born and raised Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I come from a family that, by and large, was not religious. I mean, we went to church when I was really, really young, and I'm the youngest of five, and so all of my siblings had much more of an exposure to church and Jesus and all of this than I did. And so by the time I came around and I was growing up, we stopped going to church. Like any good Canadian family, we went to the cottage instead, right? So we
Excellent.
sort of putting ourselves through Sunday school at this really, really, really conservative church that my mom had chosen for, well, longer than I was alive, but she had been going there for quite some time. My dad, on the other hand, was, this sort of like hippity dippity record store owning, wrote a book on Bob Dylan, social worker kind of guy. Like he was a very neat, cool, cultured man. And then there was my mom, who was haunted by the Baptist demons she grew up with. And so it made for a funny little family.
Yeah.
It was a big family because, again, like I said, there were 5 kids. And then my mom also ran a home daycare out of our house. And so it was just this massive sort of chaotic scene that was my childhood. But when I got into high school, I got really into the creation versus evolution debate. I thought, once I had watched these DVDs that my brother had, encouraged me to watch, they were actually DVDs by Kent Hovind, Dr. Dino, out of Pensacola, Florida. If you know him, he's the one who eventually said it was God's money that he didn't owe the government, and the government disagreed and put him in prison. Neither here nor there,
Wow.
but be really involved in this debate. And I, at the end of watching these DVDs on, creation versus evolution, decided, okay, if I believe that there's a creator, it must be the creator, that I learned about when I was in Sunday school as a kid. And so I went back to the church that I had gone to on again, off again when I was young. And I was plugged in right away. Like I was at youth group every Wednesday, church twice every Sunday, Friday night events, blah, 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 blah. I was in it to win it. I was super excited. It was sort of this young evangelical zealot. And throughout this entire time, I, of course, was realizing that I was gay, but, felt that I couldn't come out for multiple reasons. And I think looking back, part of the reason why I ever went into this high control Christian space was because, at least in my own estimation, it offered me a cover for my sexuality, right? That I thought, if I'm Christian, then I can't be queer. Meanwhile, I watched like a lot of HGTV growing up, and like I think the writing was on the wall, but I was deceiving myself into thinking that no one will know that I'm gay if I'm. But I also don't think this was necessarily like a conscious sort of like thought process, but it was certainly, looking back, I think this was something that at least informed why I was there. And so I was in this really, really conservative church. It was a fellowship evangelical Baptist church, which is quite comparable to like the Southern Baptists. And I was terrified that, anyone was going to find out I was queer. I was also made to believe, because of the, evangelical theology that I was being taught, that if you choose your sexuality over and above God, then that's a one-way ticket to hell. So I was like, well, this seems to be these are some high stakes for like a 14-year-old, and then ultimately all the way throughout high school. And so I thought to myself, I need to figure this out. I need to, fix myself, or be fixed by someone. And so I had gone down to Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. There's a lot to say about the name Lynchburg, but I'll put a pin in that for now. I get down there, and I was on campus visiting the university. My uncle was the national recruiter in Canada for Liberty, so that's why I even went down the first time. I'm as much as possible. There are a lot of funny little details, but I'm trying to get to the question. So I get down there. I see there was an announcement for those who quote unquote struggled with same-sex attraction, which is the Christianese way of saying gay or queer more broadly. So I was like, well, that's me. I'm struggling with same-sex attraction. I should meet with this guy who is, a paid university staff member. So when eventually came time to choose which school I was going to go to, it was between University of Toronto and university. Wasn't necessarily a good decision, but it was the decision that I made. And the big motivating factor for why I ultimately chose Liberty was because I knew that they had this guy on campus who was working with, quote unquote, those struggling with same-sex attraction. So off I went to Lynchburg. I was there for all 4 years. I went through there for all 4 years I was there. I was in their conversion therapy program, in the one-on-one program. In the book that we're going to talk about today, I talk about my experience in the group conversion therapy program. But when I was there, I only went to that once, but the rest of my time there was spent in the one-on-one program, which is the basis of the story that's in my next collection. So I was sort of saving that in my back pocket. But in either case, that's how I got to Liberty, and that's how I was in conversion therapy. I was made to believe that I had to, if in fact I wanted to remain a faithful, committed Christian. Eventually, I went to grad school. I should say immediately after Liberty, I went to grad school. It was a significant struggle. One can only imagine the education, quote unquote, I received at Liberty. But once I finally got my footing in, actual academic study, first at a school back in Canada, then in Nashville, and then Florida, I started to realize, especially in the earlier years right after Liberty, that I had not changed. I had gone and met with this pastor over the span of 4 years. I had, read my Bible. I had prayed profusely. I had, if you count up the number of weeks that I fasted, in hopes that I would get God's attention to change me, it would have been months that I just didn't eat throughout my entire time at Liberty, and even before when I was in high school. And so I realized that all of these spiritual practices and all of these efforts were not working. They never worked. And so I thought, well, I need to figure out, how to reconcile my faith and my sexuality. So that's actually what led me to Nashville. After I did my MA, I went and did my MTS. So I studied theology at a very progressive, div school. And it was there that I decided going into it that I was going to, instead of allowing my theology to frame all of my decisions, and of course within evangelical traditions, your theology comes first.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's most important, and then you sort of shoehorn the rest of your life into it and try to fit into that mold. I thought to myself, I'm going to live first and just be myself and see what happens. And then afterwards I can theorize. And of course, at the end of the day, theology is just theory about God, that I would theorize after, and I would use my lived experience as my guide. And that, for those outside of, these sort of religious spaces, it doesn't sound like that big of a difference. But for those of us who come from this world, it's like a world of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a huge shift. And I also, while in div school, realized that I didn't believe that the Bible was God's word as much as I believe these were words about God, which again doesn't sound like a big shift, but for those of us who come from this space, it was huge. It was sort of this like tectonic sort of shift. And so that was for me a big reason why I started to extricate myself from this high control religious space, or this high control sort of religious mentality, was that I was starting to realize that I just didn't fit into this rubric. I didn't fit into this, this mold. And so I was like, I need to take matters into my own hands. And I need to start to really consider, does my theology map onto my lived experience? And if not, maybe I should let my lived experience map onto my theology in the reverse. And then eventually I studied the Holocaust in depth, and that really shattered things. We can talk more about that, but that was sort of the
Well, that is a great lead in, Lucas, to the anthology that you published last year. You're a big fan of a collection of stories, and I'm rightly so, because you're really good at it. And in the book last year, that you published, it's filled with these really eye-opening, heartbreaking, infuriating, but also inspiring stories of survivors that had to experience conversion therapy or reparative therapy. It goes by several different names. So before we get into those stories, if you could first just quickly remind our audience, what is conversion therapy?
Yeah. So conversion therapy at its core is constituted by efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or gender expression.
And here is one of the things that you taught me in your introduction into the book. And it was one of those things, it was aha moments, because I've been saying this in a roundabout way for quite some time about conversion therapy. But you talk about the genocidal nature of conversion therapy. In fact, you write, its intent is to completely destroy queer culture, queer identity, queer expression, and queer social vitality. I thought that was really significant, important to realize that the whole concept of conversion therapy is to eliminate queer identity and queer culture. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So this is an argument that I'm drawing upon two badass sociologists coming out of James Madison University, Christine Robinson and Sue Spivey. And they have an article entitled Genocidal Intentions. And their argument at its core is that if conversion practitioners or conversion therapists could have their way, queers would not exist.
Mm-hmm.
That there would be no queer community, no queer culture, like you said, queer representation, queer vitality, queerness, queers, like we would not be here. The beautiful part of it is that conversion therapists are so bad at their jobs that this will never happen, right? Like they're not, unless they, physically kill us. They've never been able to change, anyone. So we're okay in that regard. However, there are, of course, a lot of death-dealing consequences that come as a result of therapy. So even if, their goal is, which is the complete erasure of all queers and queerness, will never be realized, that doesn't take away from the fact that they inflict a lot of harm onto a lot of vulnerable populations.
And when you say they're really bad at their job, this book exposed some of the bat craziest practice that I have ever heard. I don't want to go, I don't want to step on Missy's question, but I'll just leave it at that.
So, I have a two-part question. The first one is, you start collecting these stories, and obviously you have your own. What are the common threads that exist within these stories? And then my second question is going to be, we know the power of story. Tout statistics, we can talk about academic studies, and those are all important things. But at the end of the day, the most important, I feel like, factor in changing someone's heart and mind is going to just be someone's personal narrative. So I wondered if you might be willing to share with us a couple of those stories that you brought into the book that were particularly powerful.
Yeah. So the common thread throughout all of the stories, as the title suggests, is shame.
Mm.
This aligns with the research, which is that a recent Canadian study found that the number one cited consequence of conversion practices is shame, and that's as told by survivors themselves. So what we see throughout the collection is that people are made to be ashamed of themselves, and shame is a social affect, right? It's a social emotion that people feel through the eyes of another, right? You don't feel ashamed of yourself per se unless you have someone else looking at you to make you feel ashamed, right? And so this is something that, people sometimes will say, like, isn't that like a natural sort of response to who we are? No, it's not natural at all. It's socialized. It's taught to us to feel that way. And we see that through this range of stories. There are 17 stories included in the collection, coming from various contexts, mostly high control Christian contexts, though not exclusively. And what we see with each individual story is how people are made to feel disgusting, how they are made to feel gross, how they are made to feel sinful, are made to feel as if they are the problem. And of course, when you see yourself as a problem, that's a problem, right? And so these stories offer or give voice to this this transmission of affect, of trauma, of emotion, and of shame. And so I think that would be the red thread that unites all of these stories. As for stories that stand out, I mean, different stories stand out for different reasons. If you think about writing wise, Nathan Z's story, Away and Away, which is about his parents becoming his conversion therapist, just the way that he writes, it's this overwhelming, sort of like suffocating reader experience that you have when you're, sitting with his words, where he just repeats over and over this line that eventually by the end of it you feel short of breath. And I think that's the point. It's to make you in some small way feel like what it was like for him to have experienced this ontological attack against who he is as as a person. But you're right, storytelling, I agree with you, and this is coming from someone who's devoted most of his life to research. Research only goes so far, right? Storytelling, I think, and we can see this, in various places, whether it be media or even in research or beyond, right? That stories are the vehicles that really change hearts and minds. And so for me, the stories that stand out, I mean, there is the first story, which is just shocking for anyone who opens this. I remember when I was putting the collection together, sent my manuscript to my editor. My editor, it was like a day after I sent it to him, and he just went, "Oh my God, what an opening for a collection!" Like, it was just saying, like, "Oh my word, like this is the way you start an anthology." And I mean, the story is shocking. However, what I will say is that even though the story is shocking, and for those who read the collection will know why, I think that even though not every story is as shocking as that per se, I would say that each story is as sobering, right? It leaves you with one person's experience and in conversion therapy, and oftentimes the stories, other than one, maybe two of the stories, they don't leave you in a good spot. There's no bow on the end of these narratives. And so you're forced to sit with what it might have been like to have gone through conversion therapy had you gone through conversion therapy. So I will, there are a number of stories that I could bring up. The story that I think stands out the most for me is one that was written by an Australian author, and he talks about his experience in conversion therapy by way of these flashbacks. He's talking about how he's traveling with his band across the country, and he, goes out to the van and sits in the van, and there's these moments where he has these flashbacks to his time in conversion therapy. And one of the flashbacks that he remembers, not in conversion therapy, but at the time that he was going through it, was he has this memory of the anxiety that he felt while showering. And this is something that is not exclusive to conversion therapy. It's certainly something that's talked about in conversion therapy, but it I think speaks more broadly to high control Christian religious traditions. And that is that things that are as commonplace, as mundane, as quotidian as showering, right? Things that we do every single gosh darn day are made into sites of anxiety, made into sites of fear, and in some cases panic. So what happens in the story, he talks about, and I remember this from when I was in high school, from when I was at Liberty and beyond, that I would be very, very nervous, anxious, scared, whatever word you want to use, to shower. The reason why is because you're scared that you're going to touch yourself, arouse yourself, and then masturbate. And this was, at the time, this moment of crisis. Every single day I would go into the shower, and I, thank goodness I shower every day, but I would be in the shower, and it would be a daily thing where I'd be like, well, I can't be here too long. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. And it would be something. And I think once you remove yourself from this community, you forget about these things. Yeah. But this was a story that brought this specific experience up, and I had forgotten about it. And I think my mind had in some ways tried to protect itself. like, yeah, you don't need to remember these things. But when I read this story, it just brought me back to this place of like daily anxiety, where it was something as silly as showering. And it is silly, right? But it's made into a moment that is serious, at least in your evangelical imagination, emphasis, of course, on imagination, that this is, the stakes are high. If you keep doing this, well, it might lead you down a path that's going to lead you to hell eventually. Like, this is unbelievable psychological, spiritual, however you want to frame it, emotional manipulation, coercion. This is abusive, right? This is a way of making people think about themselves and think about their relationship to their body in a way that is anxiety inducing. And so I think that story, just that one little moment, and it's a very short, quick passing moment in the story, that moment for me brought me back to a place that I think that, again, like my mind was trying to protect me from, because it's not a good thing. And, I didn't remember where, I think in a lot of ways I'd sort of forgotten or blocked out how you have to weigh and measure and consider so carefully every single thing in your day. If I do this, will this be bad, or will this lead to this? Will that person think this? Will that person then understand Jesus in a negative light? And if so, I'm the reason that they're not going to the mental gymnastics and the mental labor and emotional labor that you have to exert in order to occupy, to be evangelical is Herculean. And so I think that story is just that moment in the story is one little snapshot of what it's like to be in conversion therapy, and more broadly, what it's like to be a queer within these spaces. And even beyond that, just to be a person, queer or not, in these religious traditions.
That's what I was just going to say. Any of us who grew up in evangelical spaces understand shame, and it largely in terms of our actions, or, again, controlling your actions, but then to put it in the context of just your very being of who you are, and the depth at which that impacts a human being. It's so awful.
And Lucas, I don't know if you intended this or not, but as I was working my way through the stories, obviously you began to gravitate to the victims, or the survivors, I should say, of conversion therapy, and you have empathy for them, you hurt with them, and I mean, you're angered by what they're going through within each of these stories. And then also, I had anger for the therapist in a lot of these stories, or the one conducting the conversion therapy. And that was my immediate visceral reaction. But then all of a sudden, it shifted after I read a couple of these stories to more feeling pity for these therapists. Because, and here's my question about intention of your storytelling. It reveals how the entire system captures all of us, oppressor and oppressed. And it has great effects on all of us. And there's that one story that you tell about the individual who is told to take their clothes off one by one as the therapist is watching. And I thought about this. I thought, oh my, this one is a horrible, horrible practice. It should be banned. But then I thought, this is the system. This is the system exposed right here. No pun intended. But it was just really eye-opening. You do that multiple times through your storytelling. Did you have an intention of exposing the entire system, and how we're all, those of us who are advocates and allies, as well as those who still hold on to a very controlling theology, victims of this bad theology and systemic issue that we're facing?
Yeah. I can think of my own conversion therapist, and you know what? The story that I have in Shame, Sex, Attraction, I don't go as much into detail about him as I do in the next collection that's coming out.
Right.
And I try to humanize him, not because he deserves anything. The man
Sure.
does not.
Right.
The
Right.
man
Right.
But what I do think is that these are people who are within a system that requires them to victimize themselves and others, right? That this is a system where for them to persist, for them to remain within the fold, they have to self-limit in a really, I think the best term is death-dealing way, right? That they have to control themselves. So they're their own, they're a victim while also being the victimizer of themselves, right?
Yeah.
And I think this system is, conversion practices, they're not exclusively within religious context or even Christian context, but the vast, 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 vast majority are. And I think that this system of this conversion therapy, these practices, fall under the umbrella of colonizing practices, right? That you, victim, are trying to bring someone else in part, I think, to make yourself feel better. Like, well, if everyone's doing it, then no one's having fun. So I think there is some sort of underpinning there. But I think on top of that, that a lot of these folks believe it's their cross to bear to help others like they've been quote unquote helped. And of course, it's all self-deception and delusion, right? These are people who are wildly self-deluded. But it's to make self-similar subjects. So to see this person, this queer over here, come on in, you're now an ex-gay, just like me. Now you do the same and you go out and you make disciples, right, of other ex-gays. And then you keep doing and you keep perpetuating the system. You're trying to colonize anyone who's different, anyone who is not like you, and you're trying to make them, in your own image as an ex-gay. This is Christianity writ large, high control Christianity writ large. It's going out there and saying, you need to be like me. You need to believe what I believe. And if you don't, then, well, you're going to hell. And there are a lot of consequences, even here on earth, blah, 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 blah. It's a colonizing system. And so I think about this system as in those terms, and that conversion practices are just part of the puzzle. And it's mostly in relationship to gender and sexuality, also, other things too, but largely this. And I just think to myself that these are people who have been forced to implicate themselves in their own victimization and the victimization of others.
Right.
So I do have, in some senses, I don't know if sympathy is the word. It's not empathy, to be honest. Like if
I felt more pity. I mean, just pity is, I could see them. Yeah, and like you said, humanize them. It doesn't erase what they did or what they continue to do, but it was looking at them as a human being, and I hate to say feel sorry for them, but it's just like seeing them as part of this system. And I remember, back in the Civil Rights Day, some of our great theologians, Howard Thurman, Martin Luther King Jr., talking about systemic racism, and that the South, the totality of the South, were victimized by this oppression of segregation and white supremacy. And I see that in your storytelling. I could see that as well, and that came out. And again, it doesn't erase or doesn't show, I guess it doesn't wipe clean what the actions of these therapists did, but it certainly demonstrates how harmful this is to all people. It's part of it. So
I was going to say, if in talking about the oppressor and the oppressed, you talk about if you remove hell from the equation, if you remove that altogether, you really don't have anything left to stand on, because what keeps people in evangelical spaces in particular involved in doing their part as the cog in the wheel is simply that fear of hell. Right? I mean, without that, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
Literally, I was writing about this today, and I was trying to figure out where to put this paragraph about hell in my next book. And the problem was it just wasn't fitting in the right place. So I couldn't really sort of situate it. But I was talking to a friend today who reads all my work before I submit it to my editor. And we were talking, and we were just underscoring the fact that it is so hard to underemphasize, to understate how centrally hell figures in the evangelical imagination. Like, to your point, none of this would happen if it weren't, not none of it, perhaps like 95% of it would not happen without hell. I think 95% of evangelicals wouldn't be evangelical if it were not for hell. I think that it is this unbelievably effective tool and an affective tool, right? The idea of like an emotional tool that binds you to this these high control religious practices because of the threat, the possibility, the anxiety of what if, I am to go to hell. And so I think that this is incredibly important. And back to what you were saying, Mitch, to tie these two things together, these are people who have been duped. Yeah. These are people who've been tricked. These are not necessarily the strongest folks, I mean, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, whatever. And I think in large part, they have been preyed upon and they have been duped by way of this hell narrative and this sort of like fear and anxiety that surrounds it. And I think that this creates this wild, really, again, effective tool to keep people within this system and remain controlled and under, in line with the rest of the, the fold.
And Lucas, I've got one other question before I turn over to Missy, and that is back in 2019, Good Faith Media, we were operating as Ethics Daily back then, produced and released a series of videos telling stories of survivors of conversion therapy. And one of the themes that continued to surface within these stories was the fact that many of them went to churches where, they were rejected, homosexuality was rejected, homosexuals were rejected, and the practice of conversion therapy was attempted. But in some of these stories, they went to churches that were, and I'm going to use quotes because I know this is an audio podcast, welcoming, but not affirming. And I've had arguments with fellow clergy who hold to that position, say, well, we're welcoming of our gay and lesbian, friends and the LGBTQ community, but we're not affirming of their quote unquote lifestyle. I wanted to beat my head against a wall. How many times I heard that. For those who are struggling, who are struggling with their theology, knowing that this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right to condemn, their children, condemn their friends, their colleagues, their coworkers, who are really looking for an alternative way of looking, interpreting, and applying Scripture, as well as embracing these people with open arms and affirming for who they are. How can they move from this welcoming but not affirming stance to a complete welcoming and affirming stance?
It's a very easy question, a very easy answer, Mitch. No, I'm just kidding. So, I mean, let me zoom out and then zoom in and then even offer perhaps some like resources that could be helpful for
Great.
folks like reading. So right now, I think, it's always wild that I have a lot of people out there who ask me, so did you really believe that conversion therapy was going to work?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, I didn't believe it, but I did it. Like, what the hell kind of question is that? And of course, the reason why people are sending their kids or why people are electing to go to conversion therapy themselves is because they believe that it works. First of all, what people need to know is, again, whatever you believe, even if you are homophobic, and I like to use the actual language, like if you're homophobic, quote unquote, traditional view, no, you're homophobic. Let's just name it as it is. If you're homophobic or you're transphobic, whatever, even if you hold that position, it does not mean that you are able to fly in the face of science, right? You can't say like, oh, I believe this and therefore I'm going to propose something that no science, no study, no research backs up. If you do, like you have egg on your face, like embarrassing. So all of the research that is out there about conversion therapy substantiates the claim that not only does it not work, right? We have never seen anyone change their gender sexuality. I always say it's like the 99 people who are like, yeah, it didn't work. And then one person who said like that it did work was lying, right? It's like, but it doesn't work. Like we know. And even those who are out there who claim to, have found victory in Christ, they'll still admit to you most of the time that they're still attracted to men or women, depending on their sex assigned at birth. Like they will admit to you, they'll let you know. So if we know that it not only does not work, but it actually causes harm, and there are numerous studies that measure the harm that conversion therapy, then you are left as a person who is, homophobic or transphobic with only a few options as to what do you do in response. Right, you can push your kid into a life of celibacy, which is actually its own form of conversion. It's its own conversion practice. We can talk more about that after. But that's an option, which again we've seen has never worked. So what does that do for that person? Nothing. Or you need to grapple with, okay, if in fact there's nothing that these folks can do to change, and you're just claiming that it's their cross to bear, you have to grapple with the cruelty of your suggestion that you should just be celibate, you should just not pursue anything. Like that's on you, first of all. Yeah. And I'm no longer in a place where I'm sort of like tiptoeing around straight folks or presumably straight folks' feelings and trying to say like, well, you hold a traditional view or you do that. No, name it and like not claim it. Well, maybe they'll claim it, but name the offense is homophobia, the offense is transphobia. That's what we're talking about here. For people, like, just again, people need to use the language that is appropriate. And so we say, okay, so you're homophobic and you're transphobic, you are against queer people, you're anti-queer. If that's the case, you now have to propose what to do. What would you propose to someone? In the same way that if I said to you, straight person, that you should not, because you're straight, be able to practice heterosexuality, what would be a viable option or a path forward? Like what would be a way that you could at least agree, if in fact we were to reverse this, although oftentimes the theological imagination reigns supreme and they are not able to get themselves out of their own subject position. It's called empathy, but they're not really capable of. right? That if that were the case, if it was the reverse, what would you think would be like a humane way of dealing with treating straight people? And there's, of course, the answer is like, well, I should be able to marry because I'm straight. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like,
Right.
I'm not sure how to put it another way,
Sure.
like other than asking you to be empathetic for a minute, like walk in my shoes, but again, the shoe doesn't fit, so they're not willing. Long story short, I think that that's the first thing, is asking questions and asking them to be in some way empathetic, which is an invitation to think differently first and foremost. But I think that that's the first part. I think the onus is on them to come up with a solution, a way of fixing or addressing the quote unquote problem, which is
Mhm.
queerness. Again, they're not going to be able to.
Right.
Like, it's
Right.
not possible, because in the same way I can't think of that for straight people can't think of that for queer people. That doesn't work.
Sure.
So I think that that's the first thing. And I think that when you do use the appropriate language, you ask questions, you extend an invitation for empathy, and then again, have a conversation that is an actual conversation, a dialogue, not sort of a monologue, because that doesn't work. That if that person is able to say, okay, at least I can agree that conversion therapy doesn't work and that it is damaging. Now it's up to me to think of a solution. And again, they're not going to find one. So from there, that puts them in an uncomfortable and an awkward position. What do I do? How do I sort of navigate this? What do I suggest to my queer child, friend, associate, whatever, whomever? Um, and so I think that that's the first thing. I think after that, that gets the wheels turning. And then I do think that it's more fertile ground, again, not always, but it's more fertile ground to actually read about the topic,
Yeah.
and to read, different authors' opinions on this very subject. And there are a range of approaches. There are folks who are side B, which I think is inhumane,
Right.
putting
Sure.
that aside. There are other folks who do reconcile faith and sexuality in a way that I think is faithful to their tradition. So if we're thinking of evangelical folks, Matthew Vine's God and the Gay Christian, right? This is a book that I think really does adhere to an evangelical hermeneutic of scripture, while still opening up space that is affirming of queer folks. If you want to think a little bit more radically, Brandon Robertson's new book, it's like, oh goodness, I forget the exact name. Can't tell Brandon I said.
I think it's queer theology. We've actually had Brandon on the podcast a couple of times. So, yeah.
It's phenomenal. And so he has a more, I think, what some would say is a little bit more progressive view,
Mhm.
that goes even a step beyond. But there are other folks. There's Justin Lee's Torn.
Mhm.
If you don't want to read and want to watch YouTube, then you can just watch Matthew Vine's book. It's essentially entirely presented online on YouTube.
Right.
He himself, right? So there are all these resources that folks really can read through and think through. I think after they do that first initial work,
Sure.
that I believe is
Well,
necessary.
that is a big help. So enter into conversation, use the right language, and then find resources, reliable, trustworthy resources. And we've got those at Good Faith Media. We also will put some of those on the show notes as well. So thank you. Appreciate it. That's a great answer.
So, Lucas, I am someone of eternal hope.
What?
I just met. He doesn't know any better.
I was gonna say, don't lie to him.
No, but I do want to
There's a reason it's storming outside right now.
Right.
It's dark clouds and thunder.
That's right. That's just every day.
Yeah.
No, but let's try to end on a hopeful note, I guess. Where do you see strides being made for the LGBTQ plus community?
You know what? I think we see it in a lot of nonprofit work, specifically legal nonprofit work. But I would also say, and I think it's super important to highlight the work of faith-based organizations, that don't get enough credit. Not that they need a pat on the back; they should be doing this work, period.
Mhm.
Because oftentimes the problem is coming from within the camp, it's within the house. So I do think that that should be done no matter what. But I do think also that some of the best work I've been seeing recently, particularly the work around conversion therapy, has been coming from I was about to say high control Christian groups, the opposite. Progressive, and in some cases liberal, faith-based organizations. And so I'm always so grateful for these organizations because they're willing to have the conversation. I think sometimes what you find in secular or non-religious organizations that aren't faith-based, queer organizations, is that they think, oh, we don't have to talk about religion. We don't have to talk about spirituality or faith. And I think that's like this unbelievably significant oversight. because just because someone is no longer in conversion therapy doesn't mean that they don't have faith commitments. Just because someone's queer doesn't mean that they don't have faith commitments. And I think that this is something, if we're thinking about people holistically, we need to address this. I mean, you can't understand American politics or American history or American culture without understanding American religion. It's impossible. So for any organization that puts its, hands over its eyes and covers its face whenever it comes to religion, they're doing a disservice to anyone they're serving. And so I think we need to have these conversations. And so I'm super grateful for faith-based organizations, because they're the ones, out of anyone I've reached out to over the past year and a bit, to collaborate, it's been the faith-based organizations that have responded most favorably and most commonly. And so I'm super grateful for these folks. I'm super grateful for the work they do, because again, they're willing to go into that uncomfortable space and talk about faith, sexuality, politics, all these things we were told never to talk about. They're willing in a way that I see as really, again, life-giving.
Dr. Lucas Wilson, thank you so much for joining us this week on Good Faith Weekly. Again, the book that we've been talking about here today is Shame, Sex Attraction, Survivors' Stories of Conversion Therapy. You need to pick it up as soon as you turn off this podcast. It has been a joy to have you this week. But before we let you go, we've got one last question for you, and Missy has the honor of asking it.
So, Lucas, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Well, I told you I would make a snide remark, but I decided that what's more important in this moment is to plug my next book. Another anthology of stories. It's called Don't Ask, Tell All: Stories of Christian Colleges' Anti-LGBTQ Regimes. The name, has changed recently, but I'm trying to remember it. Collection of stories about queer and trans experiences at Christian colleges, universities, seminaries, and divinity schools across the world, from Germany to England to Canada to Brazil to the US. The stories are wild. Some of them are absolutely hilarious and are much more lighthearted. Some are sincerely tragic. And so you have this really broad range and this roller coaster of an experience reading that book. I'm so excited about it. It's coming out with the University of Georgia Press in June of 2027. So it's a year away. I don't really know what happens in the time that I send my manuscript to when it actually comes out. Apparently it takes a year to process. I don't know, but it'll be out in a year, and I cannot wait for folks to read it.
Well, when it comes out, Lucas, come back on the show.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, my friend, thank you so much for joining this week. It has been a delight to talk to you, and we hope that the rest of Pride Month goes swimmingly for you and your partner, and we wish you all the best, and please come back anytime.
Thank you. It's been an absolute treat. Mitch and Missy, and to you too.
And to our audience, we want to thank you for joining us this week. Missy and I will be back next week with another special guest. And until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.